Hi, welcome to the show. Today I have what I think is one of my most meaningful guests here in the way we look at ourselves and the indigenous people that were here before the Anglos came. And I've invited him here to talk about that history and talk about what's going on up to date with the native population in the area. I have with me Chris Mercier. He's the vice chair of the Tribal Council of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. Nice to have you with me.
Well, thank you for having me on.
Well, let's just dive right into it. It seems to me that the indigenous people have struggled ever since the Anglo people got here. I mean, I read a quote by George Washington saying that it was the plan that the native people would become extinct and that we would have all their land. So from the beginning, it was it was not.
You are diving deep.
Yeah, it was not a good thing, and even the Lewis and Clark expedition, which we celebrate, in some way was anthropology kind of came out of colonization. So Lewis and Clark were here to kind of figure out how the Anglos were going to move in.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a troubled past.
You could say that. Say that. And I think, to be honest, I think a lot of the tribes in the western part of the United States, I think we had it pretty lucky compared to what happened to some of the tribes on the eastern part of the country, because you could make an argument that they were just about wiped out, and history was not kind to us on the West Coast either. And you're familiar with the reservation era and what happened to a lot of the tribes, and we were there. You could say there was an attempt to wipe out the native population, but that didn't happen. We, tribal people, were kind of carted off into areas where we were out of the mainstream and oftentimes given land that was worthless, put on reservations that were far away from mainstream society and kind of left to be forgotten. And the result of that is these tribal communities that have evolved each in their own unique way, and due to some actually good federal policy changes for a change, casinos mostly we're making a comeback.
A comeback, okay, that's a good way to put it. I think in many people's minds, maybe it's almost settled, though, that things are good now.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
No.
Will we?
And I might have just thrown out casinos just because I think that's an example of a federal policy that has helped a lot of tribes, but it hasn't helped other tribes. And the federal government still continues to, in some ways, not help, but also makes attempts to help tribes. I would say, though, that if you look at the condition of Indian country, we've got a lot of major health problems, very high rate of obesity, diabetes. We have a high rate of alcoholism and drug use, and some tribal communities still are dirt poor. So while gaming has helped a lot of tribes, it's introduced some new problems into those tribes, and some tribes it hasn't helped at all. So I don't know that history has yet to be made up for.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's focus on you for a minute, if we could, Chris.
Okay.
How did you come to this work? It's a full-time position, what
Yes,
you do
it is.
as vice chair. And how did you, where were you born? How did you, come to this time
I was
in your life?
born right here in McMinnville.
Mm-hmm.
I was born, there's a Walgreens there.
Yeah, born at
right now.
Walgreens.
Yeah,
That's the joke. Yeah.
There used to be a hospital there. People don't know that. That's where I was born.
Yeah.
I grew up in Salem. Ironically, I grew up with my mom's side of the family, which was Irish immigrants. I didn't know my dad's side of the family, the Merciers, until later on in life. But I grew up in Salem, graduated from North Salem High School, went to the University of Oregon and studied journalism. And then after graduating in the late 90s, I kind of was a lost soul, and I ended up, I guess you could say, settling down in the Grand Ronde community for about 9 years. And then I stepped away from council to do my first year of law school at Michigan State. Then I came back, got reelected, and have transferred to Lewis and Clark, where I still do night classes at Lewis and Clark Law. And so my career with Grand Ronde, doing what I'm doing, has taken a lot of unexpected twists and turns, but I'm still glad to be doing it. I do hope to be an attorney one day, but I'm going into my 14th year as a tribal council member, and I still feel very lucky to be doing this because not a lot of people get to see the inner workings of tribes and tribal governments, and most, I think, of the mainstream public is unfamiliar with what's happening in Indian country. So the fact that I get to be there all the time and see this, I just feel really, really lucky.
Well, what you're saying is that most people don't know, and I agree with you on me being most people. That's one reason I was excited to get to talk to you. Part of what I like to do here is learn things, and people get to watch while I do.
Good.
So, in schools, I think in the past that there wasn't a lot of history of Indigenous people taught, and certainly not from the standpoint of Indigenous people. So I think people are somewhat ignorant and even about how tribes are run today and how they interact in our culture and in our area, specifically the Grand Ronde tribe. So you are on the tribal council. The tribal council is elected by
the general council, and our general council is all of our tribal members who are 18 years and older. And just so you know, we have 5,400 tribal members. Because we were a terminated tribe, a lot of our population in the mid 1950s during termination left the area and put down roots in Texas, Michigan. We've got a lot of tribal members in Washington and California. So even though we have 5,400 tribal members, only about 60% of them actually live in the state of Oregon, and the remainders are spread out over, I think it's 48 different states and half a dozen different countries. But those are who elect us, those who are 18 years and older, and I think that's about 4,100 people. Our voter participation rate is not very high, although I guess some people tell me it's about on par with what you would expect for like a county commission race. So we get between 30 and 35% voter turnout, but they're the ones who elect us.
And on the council, you act as you're a board of directors, I guess. Is that a
You could
fair
say
way
that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you manage the resources of the tribe. Would that be a good way to put it?
I think it's probably better if I say we oversee the people who manage the resources for the tribe, because we have a general manager, a finance officer, tribal attorney, audit director. A lot of positions that you see kind of within corporations and other governments we have as well, and they're in charge of a lot of the day-to-day stuff, and we receive a lot of verbal and written reports on what's going on, but it would be impossible for us to know everything that goes on, because we've got a little bit under 1,000 different employees at the tribal casino, Spirit Mountain Casino, and then we've got, I think, 400 plus employees at our tribal governance center.
And those are right close to each other out there in the valley, right?
They are. They're about 2 miles apart.
Well, I just want to know that we're kind of jumping here a bit, but the generosity of the tribe is, I would say, legendary. I know you've given away millions and millions of dollars. Well, one thing, $4 million to the bypass comes to mind.
Yeah. And I drive that twice a week going to school up at Lewis and Clark, and I will, because some people have questioned it, I will tell you, it saves you time.
Yeah.
I can personally vouch for it saves time.
Well, yeah, the billboard there says 12 minutes by the bypass or in 12 minutes going through Dundee. But what they doesn't say was it would have taken you 20 minutes if this thing wasn't here.
I used to take that, and I know. So there are people who are criticizing it. I tell them, no way. I use it. I know. But we try to be generous, because we did have some support from the non-tribal community, and regardless of our relationships, we think we should be good neighbors, and we are still part of the community. We may have our own little community within a community, but we are still part of the community at large.
Well, I understand that it's part of tribal culture, is it not? Can you talk to me about that, of generosity to others?
We just believe in sharing.
Yeah.
I believe in sharing, not taking more than you need, and helping those in need.
And just personally, my wife runs a nonprofit called the Shadow Project, which helps motivate kids with learning disabilities in special ed classrooms in public schools. And the tribe has been very generous to the Shadow Project over the years. So, I have a personal debt of gratitude for supporting my wife's life's work, and it means a lot.
Every quarter, we do the check distributions through the Spirit Mountain Community Fund at our Tribal Governance Center. And I got to tell you, you just get a body high from how thankful people are, especially all these people running these local nonprofits who the community fund and donations from the tribe have helped them accomplish things. And it feels good to be a part of that. It really does.
I've accompanied her to the ceremony where they acknowledge, they give out the checks.
Yeah, that's
and the people there, each one gets a chance to tell their story about what they do. And the things that are being supported is just the best stuff in the world. I mean, and that's what your people do. Your council that gives that nod and that support to each of these entities. They really do a great work.
Yeah, we try. Like I said, no matter what, we always want to be known as a good neighbor and good to the people around us. And again, casinos has done wonders for our tribe, but we need to share that as well. And that was a lot of thinking behind Indian gaming in general, that it wasn't just going to provide money for the tribes, it was going to provide money for the communities, and it would provide jobs for the community and just would reinvigorate the economies of the places where they're located.
Well, that certainly has proven to be true.
Yeah.
Let's back up again. You talked about restoration, and the act that made restoration necessary was, what was the word you used? Where tribes were dissolved?
Termination.
Termination.
Yeah.
So each tribe needed to be overcome that termination with a restoration effort of their own, tribe by tribe. How did that go?
Pretty much, yeah. Well, so I was born in 1975, and from what I understand, the original restoration effort in our tribe began in the early 70s. I want to say 71. That's what I seem to recall being told by either Margaret Provost or Marvin Kimsey. So I can't speak to the experience of restoration myself. I can just tell you what has been passed along to me by people who worked on it. There was a lot of volunteer hours put in. There were a lot of bake sales. There was a lot of having to reach out to people who were formerly tribal members who'd moved away following termination. And a lot of this was done on people's spare time. There had to be efforts to document that there was still a living community there and that there were still cultural practices which remained intact. I mean, I wish I could tell you more, but I don't want to speak to something that I wasn't there. But I've talked a lot with some of the people who worked on it, like Marvin Kimsey and Margaret Provost and Dean Mercier and Catherine Harrison, and it just, if it began in the early 70s and it didn't conclude until 1983, that means that there was over a decade of everything I just outlined. And so it took a just colossal effort by people who really believed that this tribe could be restored. And I do remember Marvin Kimsey telling me once, back when I worked for Smoke Signals, the tribal newspaper, that there were periods where he just thought, man, this is never going to end. There's no end in sight. But it happened, and it's actually a year ago tomorrow, November 22nd, 1983. So 35 years ago tomorrow will have been the tribe's restoration.
Wow.
Yeah.
After decades of work. But what comes to mind is that there was more than 100 years of not being officially a tribe, but yet many of you maintained enough cultural identity to be able to be restored as a tribe.
Well, it wasn't 100 years because the tribe did have its own government, and like I said, it existed up until the mid-1950s. It was termination. It was basically when the federal government said, you guys need to assimilate, and the tribe as a government does not exist anymore. The tribe as a sovereign government doesn't exist anymore.
And that was in 1853?
1954.
Oh.
1954.
1950. Oh, it's recent. Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. So we didn't exist for 29 years.
I see.
Well, I shouldn't say we existed, but we
Uh-huh.
didn't exist in the eyes of the federal government.
And they're actually
29
encouraging
years.
you to dissolve. I mean, with their policies and what they were
There,
hoping
I mean,
for.
Yeah, well, I think what I believe and what others believe was a lot of it was these tribes that were terminated sat on land that had very valuable resources. In Oregon, it would have been timberland. Elsewhere, it might have been mineral rights or oil. But tribes were occupying land that, if they were terminated, those lands would go up for sale, and people somewhere, somebody would make money off of it.
So in 1953, the displacement of indigenous people was still very active.
I don't know if displacement's the right word, but there was still just opposition to Native people to continue to exist as they were. And termination was, I think, the realization of that. It was like the opposition to Native people remain who they are in federal policy. There'd been other efforts. You've probably heard of like what took place at boarding schools where Indian children who tried to speak their own language would get hit on the knuckles with canes. They were forbidden to speak their own language. They were forbidden to engage in their old cultural practices. So even before termination was just kind of like the final straw, or the attempted final straw. But there had been a lot of efforts up until that point to just get tribal people to assimilate.
So did each tribe, did they get restoration at different times based on
Yes,
their timeline?
They did. So like Siletz, they just celebrated their 41st restoration because they were restored in 1977. And I think the tribe that illuminated the possibility to other tribes was the Menominee tribe in Wisconsin. They were restored in, I want to say, 1971. And since then, it has depended upon each tribe. And if I remember correctly, there's still a bunch of tribes who are kind of in the hopper. Their recognition status is still, recognition or restoration status are still awaiting some sort of final answer. And then you have some tribes that they existed, but they didn't really achieve the recognition that other tribes got, and now they're just seeking recognition for the first time. And a good example of that is the Chinook tribe, who are located up in Washington at the mouth of the Columbia. And they were slated to be recognized in the early 2000s, and that got derailed, and now that's in court.
Do you happen to know if it's, since the 70s, has it become, I don't know, easier, or at least there's been changes such that it's not so difficult to become restored? Or
It's
there's
harder.
It's harder.
It's harder.
What's
And
going on?
Gaming, Indian gaming.
I see.
I mean, and I think there was even a report, I'd have to dig it up, where I want to say the General Accounting Office, where they stated just that the proliferation of gaming has led to efforts to get tribes restored and or recognized just for the sole purpose of building a casino. So that's why in the early 2000s, the government sort of took this position that we will not be handing out recognition or restoration status willy-nilly. It'll be more difficult from here on out, and that's proven to be the case. In January of this year, though, there was 6 or 7 tribes that were granted recognition in Virginia. So I think we're up to 574 recognized tribes in this country now. But you wouldn't know that because there's only 9 in Oregon, but tribes are scattered throughout this country.
Yeah. Now, even that 9, though, your confederated tribes is kind of a coming together of how many, approximately?
Boy, like I said before, I've heard the number 60 thrown out. I've heard 27 is the one that we kind of most commonly thrown out. But there were a bunch of different tribes and bands and people who didn't speak the same language all herded onto the Grand Ronde Reservation. And one side effect of that, unfortunately, is that some of our native tongues have died out, which is why we've done a pretty good job of restoring Chinook, which was mostly a trade language. It's about 70% indigenous words, 20% French, and 10% other words. But some of our other languages, like Santiam, I think, and Kalapuya, and I don't know that there's very many speakers of those languages left, and we have not been able to revive them the way we have Chinook.
Now, you were raised by an Irish mother. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I was raised on the Irish side. My mom's
So
Irish side.
you probably don't speak an indigenous language.
So I took, in 2006, 2007, I took Chinook for a year. It was only offered on Monday nights for a couple hours, and I took it. And I didn't take it long enough to have learned it. I'm glad I took it because you weren't just being taught the language. The instructors would teach us some of the history. There was also a history lesson as well, because certain words are like bastardizations of English in Chinook. Like the word for English in Chinook is Boston Wawa.
That's funny.
Yeah, because
Sounds like
Wawa, of course, is talk, and Boston was just
Oh, that's funny.
yeah.
Can you say something in Chinook? Is that?
I can't. I don't know if my pronunciation's any good. I can say it's a good day, and that is Uksan Dre Sklush.
All right.
Don't ask me to spell it.
Okay. Well, that's great. So I guess what we've been talking about is the fact that a lot of the culture has been kind of dispersed and then kind of brought back together as best it can be. And you have, out of many languages, maybe Chinook is the one that is surviving the best.
Yes, and we have a early childhood immersion program. So we have kids that are getting immersed in this in a classroom where that's all they do is they speak Chinook. And if you go into the classroom, there are different words written on objects throughout the classroom that are in Chinook.
All right.
And we even have an app too. I can show you maybe when we're done recording here.
What's the name of it?
It's just Chinook Wawa.
Okay.
But Chinook is not two O's. It's a U, CHINUK, Chinook Wawa.
CHINUK.
And it's an app, and they'll. I don't know. I don't think you'll be able to master the language with this app, but you can download it and you can learn a word here and there.
But the fact that it's there is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
That the high tech is preserving the ancient. It's great. Yeah. Speaking of ancient, just that perspective that indigenous people were here since the beginning of time, when consciousness was first evolved to acknowledge time, tens of thousands of years. And then in the last, 200, things have changed
Dramatically. Yeah.
And so it almost seems like a struggle for survival.
For some tribes, yeah, it still is. And I don't know that you'll ever be able to go. Well, you just will never be able to go back to the way things were. But the best we can do is revive what traditions we can and instill awareness and knowledge of our tribe's history and what a lot of our cultural practices were and still are in the present day population. And we put a lot of time and energy into doing that. I think if you get the chance, you should go down to our Chichalu, our museum/cultural center, and we have on display artifacts that are on loan from the British Museum of Natural History. Not just to see those objects, which are over 100 years old, but also just to see just the exhibit and how we've taken some of our tribal members who they've really tapped into their creativity and just made an exhibit that I think is out of this world. It's really cool.
Now tell us again, where is that?
So if you go past the casino, casino's always the marker. Anyway.
Sure.
I mean, it just is.
It's amazing.
You go past the casino and you hang a right on Grand Ronde Road. It used to be a grade school.
Okay.
But you would not think it's a grade school now, because we've got cedar paneling on everything. It looks cool. Even the outside, the exterior looks way cool.
Take a right on Grand Ronde Road.
Grand Ronde Road, just go up like
Not far.
a few hundred feet past the general store, and there you'll see Chichalu off to the right. So there might be people sitting on benches in front of it accessing the Wi-Fi signal. But
Okay, now you talked about getting out of the community with your presence, and I know you have several events each year. There's a restoration powwow which was
Which was Sunday, yeah, our
Sunday.
restoration celebration, yeah.
okay. So, and that's this here we are in November. It's like right before Thanksgiving ish.
Yes.
Okay, so that's something the general public can come down and get a good.
You can come down to our restoration celebration. You can come down to our veterans powwow, which is usually the second week of July, and then our contest powwow, which is the third weekend in August. We do have some other events, and there's one that I really want to hype up because I think it's way cool, and that is usually in the first week of June. We will have our First Foods celebration, where we have some tribal members who have just done a great job of reviving their knowledge of cultural foodstuffs. And you can go there and have acorn, quail, lamprey. I don't know if you've ever had roast lamprey before.
No, I haven't.
It's kind of oily, and I like it, but prepared right, it's really good. Salmon. Sometimes we'll have bear, elk, whatever. The whole point of this celebration is to revive and serve food to people who want to try it that used to sustain our people. So you can have like nettle soup, like I said, some acorn stew. Last year we had this chef who had prepared some food that was like a rabbit meatballs. He'd kind of put a modern twist on some of the stuff, like rabbit meatballs, deer terrine. It was just cool. It was good.
And this is when does this take place usually?
Usually the first week of June.
First week of June. Okay, so these are a lot of dates. That you just named 4 or 5 events that people could be interested in. So the place to go is to your website.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's been on the screen. There it is,
That's the
Grand
one.
Ronde.
Or our Facebook page as well. They do a pretty good job of updating that. And since everyone seems to get their information through social media, yeah, Facebook works too.
Well, the tribe is a big part of the community, and I think it's an outsized part of the community based on the population because of how you impact the community. And I think people maybe they like that, how you're generous to the community, but I think I could enrich myself by going to these events and getting a feel for what you're doing to keep the culture, which to me has been with all the pressure to disperse, to assimilate. It's actually kind of a miracle that so much of it is still here, and to have that come through all that opposition is like I said, a bit of a miracle. So to go and witness the fact that it's still here, and would you say growing? Would you say that cultural awareness and people gathering around traditional ceremonies and practices is growing, or what?
I would say it's growing, and just to use like the First Food celebration as an example, this really started about 10 years ago, and you might have gotten a couple dozen people would show up for that. And then this past year, I'm pretty sure we had more than 100, if not 150 people showed up for the celebration at the Plank House. So using that event as an example, I'd say the interest is growing. I think a lot of it is awareness, like you yourself. How do people know that these things are going on? Because what I've just described is just the tip of the iceberg, because we offer classes on drum making, tanning hides, basket weaving, and with the basket weaving, you will actually go out into the wild and secure the materials for the basket yourself. So like it's not just they give you the materials and you make the basket. Depending on who the instructor is, you'll go out there and grab the materials yourself.
So I'm sure some people just lit up like, what? That sounds great.
I'm serious.
Through the website, through Facebook.
You should be able, somewhere.
Yeah,
And if
get
you're
connected to
interested,
that.
you could always just email us and we'll direct you.
Yeah. Well, Chris, we're out of time. We've just, like you said, the tip of the iceberg. It's been great to have you here.
Thank you.
I've learned a lot, and I hope to learn a lot more. Thank you so much.
I'd gladly come back on.